Hello, everyone who are joining us virtually and in person. We're so excited for today's event with our lovely guests, Dean Pinder and Lauren YoungSmith, hailing from Los Angeles, and who will be installing our 40th anniversary AACC commissioned mural. So we're really excited for that. It's something that I know our students have been dreaming about for many decades, and we're so fortunate that in this 4th decade of our AACC history that we'll be able to make kind of their wishes come to life. And we're super excited also just to have our new School of Art Dean, Pinder, here to just be in conversation with Lauren, given your own work with murals and public art. We're really excited for the generative conversation that we're about to have. Before we get started, before I turn things over to Dean Pinder, Juliana Yi, I direct the Asian American Cultural Center. For those of you who don't know, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in my year in this role, and it's just my deepest honor and pleasure to direct this space, this community that really has lifted me through some of the hardest times this past year and a half. And my hope is that the conversation we have today, and also the art that will be installed on the outside of the building in the next 2 to 3 weeks, will provide a space for healing for our community to come together and celebrate and enjoy and not always be bogged down by a lot of the loss that we've suffered over the last year and a half. And so we hope that, you know, we can begin the process of healing collectively as a community. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the lands on which we are settled upon. We are coming from obviously many places virtually across the United States, perhaps even beyond. And we want to acknowledge ancestral homelands and traditional territories of the indigenous peoples who have been here since time immemorial. The AACC specifically wants to acknowledge the Quinnipiac people, the Mohegan, Mashantuck Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Pagasit, Niantic, and other Algonquin-speaking peoples who have stewarded through many generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. And that makes possible today the fact that this university exists on this space for us to learn and grow together is truly because of the Native peoples who have stewarded these lands. And so solidarity is an ongoing project for us here at the AACC, and our goal is to continue to build kinship with Native peoples across the Americas, and recognizing that indigeneity goes beyond the Americas and also into the rest of the globe. So with that, we just want to name and acknowledge it and begin with our event. So thank you. Thank you so much.
So welcome everybody. I think we're gonna just introduce ourselves a little bit. You heard that I'm the new dean of the Yale School of Art, and I've come back. I was a graduate student here about 107 years ago in history of art, and I'm really happy to be able to come back and do other things on the campus besides just being in the library, actually lead some initiatives and enjoy being around really creative people and all the artists that are over at the school. And Lauren, will you tell us a little bit about where, you're based in California, but you also have been doing art all over the world. And I had the privilege to do one of your interviews where you talked about your undergraduate experience where art was not necessarily the thing to do, but you made an art major out of your undergraduate experience. So maybe we could start there, if you could talk about that journey first.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm very excited to be painting the next few weeks. Yeah, we were just having an informal conversation about this. Also, as I'm really interested in what's happening here with the art program. My experience with studying art wasn't as guided as I hear it is within the Yale universe. I attended Stanford University, which is an amazing school, as we know, but it wasn't. The art program is not one of its finest programs, and Mostly because the focus is on tech there, but I was very adamant that I wanted to pursue my passions. So I actually double majored in English, like creative writing and art practice, with the intention to do storytelling, like visually and with words. I wanted to write graphic novels initially. And this, it's sort of, you can tell, like this slideshow of my work going on unexplained in the background. But as you can tell, there's a really strong like narrative undertone to everything that I paint for that reason. But I think that my experience as an undergrad, not having a lot of direction or like stringent guidance as a student, because the teachers were like quite hands off. So I didn't get a studio space really until I was like a senior, even though I was declared. There wasn't like a huge like community there. So what that meant for me was that I had to be really hard on myself and make work in my own time and in my own space. I like found a closet in my house and like turned it into my studio in this like hippie co-op that I lived in. So while that was stressful at the time, what I think it did for me as a graduated person was like I was very used to being self-directed and not having like working all the time just on my own of my own vision. And I've sort of carried that through for the last 8 years, I think. Yeah.
And do you feel that that has also made you feel that you can have more license to break out of the studio? And you know, what really brought you to wanting to do these giant, really challenging paintings outside? And as you mentioned to me before, primarily by yourself. Like, how did you make that shift from doing things in the closet studio to going all over the world and making murals?
Great question. Yeah, so I sort of, proverbially came out of the closet after school, and what I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be in the art world, but I had no real like knowledge of it or that you could do it. So what I did, being like a very like empowered young person who wasn't jaded yet, was like, I'm just gonna do everything I can possibly do until I figure out what I don't want to do. So I was an unpaid intern in like every aspect of the art world, which I wouldn't recommend, like, because you should be paid for what you do. But I worked at DreamWorks, I worked at Juxtapose, I worked at 826 Valencia, I worked at 5024 SF, like galleries, doing all these different jobs in different areas. And I didn't want to do any of it. I just wanted to make art for myself. But that's why I had to learn. When I was working in San Francisco, was I worked at a pirate store in San Francisco. It was one of my first jobs. Like I was like customizing eye patches.
Did you hear that? Pirate store. She said pirate store. Customizing eye patches.
It was awesome.
That's a job.
Yeah, it was dope. It wasn't well paid, but it was dope. But yeah, so my boss at Juxtapose at the time was like, there's someone painting a mural downtown if you wanted to see this happening, because I was a big street art fan. I had no idea how it worked or anything. I like tagged sort of around, but didn't understand it. And I went out and saw my friend Nitro was painting this huge dissected tiger on Market Street, and was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like in a boom lift, like doing this like really hardcore, very physical thing in the middle of a city, and making art on a grand scale. And I was like, I can do that. Like, I was like, well, I don't know how to do that, but I'm gonna learn how to do that. This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So I stayed and like hung out with him like up until it was done. Like helped him unpack boxes, like we became friends. And then I think he saw that I was like really passionate and like interested and like willing to learn. And so he invited me out to his studio in Vienna, where I came, and he took me like painting track sides and getting acquainted with graffiti and like learning how to use spray paint. And I kind of just like sort of took it from there, and just like pretended like I knew what I was doing for a while until I figured out what I was doing, which has taken me the past 8 years to like pare it down into a short story. Yeah.
But then how, I think also is a real mystery, probably the next stage, right? So you started doing graffiti, and then you apprenticed sort of with Nitro, working with helping him with large scale work that he was doing. And then how did that translate into you getting your own commissions and doing your own work?
That is a really good question. I think that it's sort of like a labor of love. One of being an obsessive documentarian is like, you know, which I would recommend from a very early stage, even like during college, I started documenting everything I did, which helps like not only show people what you do, but also for you to have a track record of your progress. And then also just like hustling, being in contact with a lot of people, not being afraid to like ask if there are opportunities, or being willing to help, or put yourself in situations where you could have access to opportunities. And then I think there was an element of like, people did take notice, because there's not a lot of femme people in the street art world. There's not a lot of femme people of color. I mean, there are now, like there are more and more, but it's a predominantly very cis, het, white, male world, like every world almost, you know, especially in the creative field. So I think being someone who's like unafraid to speak about those matters, or be like, I would like to take up space here and tell my story, tell the story of people that I represent. Because my work has always been about like the Asian femme, or like subtle issues that we deal with, and like more and more social justice lately. I think people took note that I wasn't just trying to make pretty things, but I had issues to talk about, and they deserved like wall space and space in real time.
And is that how you became known, like to get these types of commissions? That, and this is one of the questions I had asked you in the email, about how you developed this very, very specific, as we can see here in the slideshow, like very specific iconography, your storytelling that you said that's what you wanted to be doing, your graphic novels that are now murals. So how did you get to that? I don't want to say a niche market, but what you said is telling the femme story, Asian American story, all of these things. And that, how did you hone that? Because your work looks very specific to you, like your aesthetic. And that's something that I'm really interested in, how you hone that to be so clear.
This is a question that I was really worried about for a long time in the beginning too. I was like, no one's gonna notice me unless I have style. And then, you know, all my sort of elders and like people I looked up to were like, you need like, let it happen. Like it will happen. Just work hard, let it happen. You can't force it, which turns out to be very true, I believe. I went through a lot of different stylistic phases that were really bad for like a long time, and still like feel like I have many evolutions to go through, but it's just true. Like, I think that you make a lot of crap to get somewhere where you feel good, and have to be willing to try things and not get stuck. And still feel like I'm doing that. But I think it's like one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten is that like, you shouldn't paint what you think you should paint. You paint what you want to paint, and like what you're into. And that doesn't mean like pulling from art that you're like, it's like pulling from like nature that you're into, or a dream that you had, or like a movie you saw, or like an article you read. Like what turns you on basically creatively. So you can see a lot of like stylistic influences from comics and like mythology, and like early on it was anime and like color schemes from like, I don't know, psychedelia and dreams and all that kind of stuff. So it's just like, to have passion for what you do, you have to go after like what you're into. And so I think like that holds strong, then it's going to develop in itself.
And so you mentioned some of your sources. Could you say more? Like, you know, we just saw such a range there, especially the black and white imagery that looks so much like, you know, kind of imagery that you would see from Japan or China with calligraphy. And
yeah, sure. So like those black and white drawings are from a very recent series I did based off of Chinese mythology, which is also a way for me to sort of like connect back to my heritage as a second generation Chinese person. So I've been researching a ton of mythology from that area, and like sort of drawing them within my like scope of aesthetics, which often have like are more modern. And then like I'm always doing research on queer iconography. This is something I did for Queer to Stay, which is like focus on supporting like local queer businesses. This is in Sacramento, and I've been doing a lot of like regional research. So if, like I arrived in Sacramento, and was like, wait, this is where the Transcontinental Railroad began. This is a perfect place to do a piece talking about the history of Chinese Americans in California. So like the space that you work in is also so fertile, which is like why it's so cool to actually be here at the AACC. Like meeting people who like spend time in the space, because it really affects the way that you paint, the way that you tell. Yeah, I also draw a lot of inspiration from books and poetry, dreams, like talking with my friends who recommend other like Asian storytelling sources, or like, you know, legends you heard from your ancestors or your grandparents that people don't know about. So yeah, I'm all over the place.
No, I like how you're talking about, that's another really key thing that I enjoy about studying public art is the site specificity, right? And I love to hear that you're someone who not only is coming in to make a work of art in a community, but to actually engage and to really take in where you are and to do that research of the site. What have you found by going to all these different places and kind of basically pushing yourself out of the comfort zone, out of your closet studio? Okay, I'm gonna keep talking about the closet studio.
Yeah.
So you like are plopped down into like a new place, right? That then you go and research it. So what do you find are sort of the challenges as well as the rewards to having an art practice that you have to go somewhere and be there for a week or 2 weeks or something to make your art?
It's mostly rewards. To be able to travel and make art is the greatest thing on the planet. I think that's why I chose, like, that's why I've been in street art for so long and haven't stopped to like write a book or like try to do graphic novel work. I love traveling so much, and being in a space and being like meeting people and being part of the community. It is a little difficult to constantly be like code switching into different spaces and like being in hotels and making work in hotels and like getting on planes. But it's really fun. And then I think sort of one of your other questions got into this, but there's the other element of being part of a community and making work in it is that also there's like the side element of gentrification that happens with making work. So that's something we also need to be cognizant of, because it is really dangerous. We as artists go around painting murals and then the area around gets gentrified and then people get pushed out, including artists. And so that's like one of the big questions that we always have to ask ourselves. When the solution is never to stop making art though. So my solution has been to try to like do more outreach and do more community minded work. So that even though my work sometimes has an adverse effect on the communities, it also is doing like a net good, hopefully. Or maybe not net good, but like doing more good. So like oftentimes if I'm making work about queer issues or Asian American issues, then I will also, that is making money. Like my girlfriend and I created like an Instagram account, but also sort of a nonprofit called Squid Tropica. It's a stupid name. So our names put together, I know, but you won't forget it. But it's for queer and BIPOC artists, and it's also like whenever I have like excessive profit on something that has to do with queer or BIPOC issues, I will take some of the profits and like donate it to an artist that I've been looking at, no strings attached, just so that I feel like there's like this give and take like for the community that's like fed who I am. And that makes me feel better about like passing through the world and talking about these issues that belong to all of us. But I would like to expand on this idea, just so that, yeah, because it's a complex issue. Not that that will solve gentrification, but it feels like something that's more like give and take.
Well, that reminds me, I hope that while you're here in New Haven, that you're able to go to a place called Next Haven, which is a big community art center that's in Dixwell. That's kind of on the other side of Yale campus. That was started by an alum from the Yale Art School named Titus Kafar. And he created it. It offers residencies for artists from all over the country and some from the world. It has a gallery. It has kind of a WeWork type of space in it. And it's right down the street from high school, or any artists of residency there. To be in that space, they also understand they're going to take on mentoring high school students. So, and the reason why he created that was exactly what you said, to try and balance out, like, I'm making money on art. I want to still contribute and be connected to a community, to my community. For him, it's as an African-American man. And so how do I give back, right? And he actually got a MacArthur grant and used that money to build this space here in New Haven. So all of you should, has anyone ever been there? Anyone here? You all should go there. It's not far. It's not far. And it has a show up right now. But I hope that you get to
definitely
go see that, because that's exactly what he said, you know, that he was like kind of, he wanted, you know, selling some good work and making bank, and he was basically calling his mom and saying, I feel good about this, right? Like I'm doing what I love, but how do I create that balance? That's exactly what you're saying, and I think that's a really great thing that artists need to talk more about, right? And be honest about it, and also share strategies on how they can keep that balance, but still, and not just leave the art world, but still keep giving back and doing what they love.
Yeah, absolutely. So our success should, my successes should be all of our successes.
Yes.
Pulling each other up.
Mhm.
And no one should be like weeping.
Mhm.
But yeah, just more of a enough for everybody type,
Mhm.
type feeling.
And so I'm interested in, so these are artists that you follow. How do you even know about these up and coming artists?
Very good question. So I mean, the whole thing started as like I was like, as an artist, I'd like to know more about artists who are queer and BIPOC because I don't know about that many. The street art world is very like you start seeing the same people over and over again.
Mhm.
I was like, well, it'd be cool if there was an Instagram that had this, and then but there isn't. And so I was like, well, I'll just make it. I worked at Juxtapoz for a long time. Like I'm good at Instagram. I
Mhm.
didn't put it to good use. So I and it's there, and I started doing research and putting out calls for artists and that kind of thing. I learned what hashtags were for. Like I never got it before, but now I'm like, oh, this is actually helpful for like finding artists who identify as queer and trans and any kind of like area of identification. And then through friends too. Like even if I'm here, I'd love to hear you all know any artists who identify within these bounds, so I can look at that work, their work, and like it's also not just like an Instagram. It's like building community. Like people have connected with each other through it, and like know that I felt less alone through the pandemic because of it. I was like, there's people making art about issues that I'm feeling about gender and identity and this kind of stuff when I'm in a house where there aren't really people who are doing the same thing. And it made me feel less alone. And I have to think that hopefully that does that same thing for other people. So it's a work in progress, but hopefully it's like shedding light on some of these things. Yeah.
So maybe like when we do the Q&A, people can like shout out their favorite artists.
Oh yeah, totally. Please feel free to like message me or send me
Yeah.
emails about. I'd love to know about anyone who's making. Yeah.
And when you mentioned about the pandemic and being able to try to connect with the community, you showed, I'm sure we're seeing it again and again, your Stop Asian Hate image up there. And I'd love for you to talk about how we were all feeling with so much that was going on in the last year. And I don't know how you were because you were a maker, but I was at an art school and I was at one point, I just was thinking like, what can art do for us right now, right? Everything is like a shitstorm right now. So is there a place for art? And I'd love to hear as a maker, because I was an administrator running an art school. And at some points I was thinking, this is shit. I just want to walk away from it. I just want to go and be more active. Like, I don't know, like leave everything I'm doing and maybe work on, I keep saying like, Black female mortality, maternal mortality or something like, I just something else. So I'd love to hear like your struggles with that and how you were able to either keep channeling it all into your art or not.
Absolutely. And this is, I'm sure this is a tough question for anyone who's been caught up in it too, because it's hard to like go back to the feelings that you had, because it's really tough to like see horrific things happening to people who like could be your family members or people you love, and then remember the kind of feelings you went through in the wake of that. But I completely agree with you that there was like this feeling of like hopelessness and like I couldn't personally be there to stop this from happening, and like the anger that goes with that. And the feeling of just being like, I am completely like insignificant in this setting, but I do have some tools and I have to put them to use in some kind of way. And so what I did was I went out and I painted a wall in Chinatown several years ago. And it had been repainted since, but I went back to the people who own the wall and was like, I have something that I need to do. I think like based on like what just happened, this wall is in Chinatown. I think it would be important for this to be reclaimed by a Chinese person. would you let me paint it again? And they were like, totally. It wasn't like they reached out to me. I funded all of it. I rented the lift, all the paint.
Wow.
But it was like, and I don't do that much anymore. I did it a lot when I was starting out, but like, it goes to show like, you have to be willing to take up space when you have stuff to say, which felt better in the end too, because it was like, this is for us rather than just have, maybe like a white building owner being like, come do your thing. So I just went out and was like, and I don't paint letters that often, but I was like, I need to like say this in the boldest way I can possibly say it. This is the only thing that feels good right now, and it might not do anything, but I do have a platform, and like maybe it'll help create some healing for other people, if not just me. So I painted the Stop Asian Hate mural, and I wanted to, instead of it just being like angry, which it also was, paint like an altarpiece sort of thing in the center that also could be like a space for rest. And it was really emotional. Like, it wasn't just like painting a mural. It was also like a lot of my Asian friends came out and like sat with me and talked to me about the history of Chinatown and like cried and like aired out their feelings during it. And it was really powerful, like process. And it was like this full body, like painting experience that wasn't just like putting paint on a wall. And so that within that, you realize that there is healing when in making things, even if it's just a little bit. And then I was, there was no like thought past that, but like a lot of people came out and saw it as like a jumping off point. And like a Static Medium, which is a print shop in LA, like offered to print posters of it and then donate all of it to Squid Tropica. So we like sent thousands of dollars to API artists, which is like, if we can help some Asian artists like pay rent, great. Like hopefully, and that feels like it helped a little bit in some way. And then also just creating joy. Like we had an event where people came out and like ate food and danced, and there was like a feeling of joy that came after a really dark period, and that means so much sometimes. And then there's a community that reached out to do a lion dance with it at some point, which was incredible because it's such an honor, like as a Chinese person, to have a lion dance like with your mural. So like for me, I hope that was like a sign that like the community was claiming it as a space and then like a sign of joy for themselves, and that meant everything to me because it doesn't, the message doesn't belong to me, it belongs to us. So going from a place of being like, I'm insignificant, but I'm going to still try to do what I can with like the tools that I have, which is spray paint. Going into that, like even if it's small, it's in LA, whatever, like that's how I know that it can do something good. And or even just like knowing that story, like maybe is a sign that like more people will take that and keep doing that, and that creates like energy out of something scary. Is my long answer.
Oh my God, it's a beautiful answer. Oh my gosh. That was like an amazing answer. I mean, I love that, how, it was a journey, right?
It's heavy.
A heavy one. And I like how, again, it shows how you could take that personal exercise that you really needed to do, and how when you did it publicly because of your skill sets as a mural painter, that it became this larger community-based project of healing and joy. And I'm sure that if we were to transport ourselves to that location right now, there's probably a lot of stuff happening around it.
I hope so. Yeah, I learned a lot too. Like, I've had points where I was like, I want to quit too. And it really taught me like the power of making things again. So yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow. That was a great story, actually. And could you actually talk a little bit about, I mean, I'm not familiar with line dance, so what that means as that kind of nice full circle for you, that it started off, as you said, something scary and full of pain, and then ended with being now for line dance.
Absolutely. So if you've been to like a Lunar New Year festival or Chinese New Year, they always do the lion dance. And they often do it for other celebrations. You can hire a lion dance to give like a birthday party or something. But it's sort of like a blessing. You're supposed to do it before so that it is like blesses the space so it'll be successful. But this is the whole ritual with like the lion, you throw a cabbage at the lion and the lion eats it, and you dance with the lion. And like, I just remember seeing it as a kid all the time and being like, I have an interesting like connection to my heritage because I'm half Chinese, and so like I always knew that it was like really cool and really powerful, but never really felt like I could claim it.
Mhm.
But I think since I've like lost my grandparents and really like came into like caring about where I come from, I was really into the lion dance, and I had done a huge painting of the lion dance that was based off of an envelope my grandma gave me the last time I saw her before she passed. And so I like the lion dance. I really like to have a lion dance. So they offered to do one. I was like, oh, this is a sign that like this is the community is claiming it for themselves. And it's just really badass. Like lion dances are awesome. They're so cool. They're like acrobatic. Like yeah.
So has it happened yet, or it's gonna?
Yeah.
Okay.
They just planned it themselves,
Okay.
and they sealed it so the mural's there permanently. And it was just cool. I was there as like a bystander. Like you know, it wasn't about me. It wasn't about like any of that. It was just like there's elders in Chinatown who like chose to do it, so I wanted it because they've been there so much longer than I have. And there were like, you know, Native American dancers and whatnot because like it's on Tongva land too, so it's a sort of like multicultural experience. Yeah.
Is there like a video of that, or?
Yeah, there's some on my Instagram, but I can reshare them. I'll send you them.
Yeah, that sounds really
It was
amazing.
really, really, I cried a lot.
Wow. And I love how you mentioned that, you know, you were a bystander, right? And I think that is another thing that why I love public artists, that I admire them so much. Again, leaving the closet studio and being out in public, and then also understanding that it's not yours anymore, you know, that you have given a gift. And I don't think that, as you know, the act of making art is so much driven by your ego and by yourself and your body and all those things. And one thing that you kind of cross that line when you're a public artist is that you give it away. And that was so clear about what you said, that you created the space for them to have this amazing community event. And then you said you were just a bystander. And that's what you loved about it, that it had taken off without you and become the communities. And that is absolutely what drives my love of community artists, because they get that, like you just explained. So I wonder if, I think I went through my questions tonight. Can we talk about them all?
I think so.
I bet people have a lot of questions about your incredibly, as I said, super complicated iconography. You have so much detail in them. That's of course layered on the incredible color palette that you have. So are we ready for people to ask some questions about all this amazing work that you're seeing here? Anybody? Fire away.
I wonder if you can talk about, and you know I've asked this before anyway previously, but I wonder if you can talk about how your journey into your heritage has come through in your art, and also like the impact. So I've asked you this question before, but maybe you thought about this more, but how the impact of like repurposing your tradition to share with others so they learn from your Chinese heritage and the Chinese tradition, but without diluting it too much. So keeping it fresh and keeping it relevant, but without diluting it too much, the tradition is actually lost.
Yeah, and this is a great question because we talk about it a lot, because it keeps, if you have it in your mind while you're working on these things, it keeps evolving. And I think this is also something that Kim has worked on in your work too, is about how do you integrate with your heritage and like have it be like a fertile ground without just sort of like co-opting it or just like rehashing it. And I think for me, it's been like, there's been some images of a big installation that I made for my last show with Louis that has these tiger dragons on the side and there's 3 faces that all rotate. And the basis of that,
oh yeah, it's right here.
yeah, so these are multi-layered like cutouts that rotate, but the whole image is based off of these. You might have seen like in a Chinese restaurant or something, like these 3 old men, like ceramic old men. And I grew up with them in my couple's house, but I never knew what they were. But after they passed, I started doing all this research and being like, I'm gravitating towards these old guys for some reason. They're awesome. I don't know who they are, but I researched. They're the Sun Shing, which are the three stars, and they're 3 sort of entities that represent like good tenets for a good life in Chinese history. And I was like, I don't know why I'm interested in these guys, but I'm gonna work on it by making this huge sculpture, and I'm gonna find out through the process of making this why they're interesting. But then, you know, a lot of Chinese culture is very much like wealth and like longevity and wealth as good tenets, and I kind of wanted to like rehash those and tell stories about what I believe to be good tenets of a good life, as in like selfhood and curiosity and those kinds of things. So I like sort of reworked what the meaning of these characters were in the femme framework, like all the characters of femme, to talk about what I through my lens. So I think, to say in a shorter way, like I think it's cool to interact with your culture in a way that also like has a more like modern like rehashing of it, in order to like pay homage to where you come from, but also like say that maybe some of these ideals are antiquated in a certain way. And then I think by talking about that practice, maybe it has other people thinking about like, what do I believe in that comes from my culture, but also how does it work within like what I believe in right now? Because like, you know, we never talked about gender or sexuality, like my grandparents didn't care about gender or sexuality that much. It's not like they're old. So like, yeah, I think just sort of updating everything. I don't know if that obviously it's a complex question.
Yes. And it's probably a different answer depending, you know, it could be what you're doing and what headspace you're in.
Yeah.
In terms of that shifting relationship between tradition, history, and your own like personal identity, right? That we all negotiate, especially as BIPOC people. There are the representations that are presented to us, and then there's our own embodied reality.
Yeah.
Right? That's sometimes not so clear where those divisions are, right? And how we have to own how much those images actually work on us and who we are. Yeah. Any other questions? I have a question about the bottles.
Okay.
Why are people in bottles?
Okay, this is a great question.
Message in bottles.
So I started doing that as a sort of, I got really into sort of this cabinet of curiosities sort of vibe, because I really love, like when I travel to other countries, going to these marketplaces that are sort of like the witchcraft market or the, you know, the herbs and spices, or in China, like every kind of like crazy, super clustered Chinatown stalls where like there would be like an old woman who like gives you like a bottle full of something that like will either cure you or like, you know, whatever. I really love that sense of the elder, and I sort of like dream world where I would like interface with someone like that, and they would help me find the answers to something that I was trying to figure out. And so I think I gravitated towards the bottles as like sort of an aesthetic, like symbolic way to talk about storytelling within an enclosed like space. Like there's like a lot of murals you'll see, like it'll be like a cropped image of something, whereas mine are like these full stories. Like it'll be an entire, like you can see everything that exists in this world within the entire wall. And I kind of I like being able to control everything that's happening in the scene. And I think the vessel as like a symbol for like the internal space is also sort of like a fertile metaphor. So, and then I just started doing it, and I really like painting glass for some reason. Like it's like a really fun aesthetic like practice to try to do that. And so it all just sort of like came together in that way. I was really, jumping back, I got really obsessed with those bottles of snake wine we had in like Thailand and China. As a kid, and my brother always wanted to try it. And I was like, I think I was just really into those, and was like, I would love to like make like a resin sculpture of it that has like a snake girl inside. And so it just turned into this whole series that started gaining more and more meaning. But yeah.
And speaking of, so you showed us the thing that did have a sculptural component. So is that something that you see yourself doing more of now, and expanding beyond the 2D into more sculptures?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a solo show slated for next year where I think there will definitely be a sculptural element, just because I loved making something that was interactive. It had like layers of meaning to it. And actually we'll be installing it at Scope at Art Basel.
Oh, great.
In December.
I'll be there.
Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. Cool. Great. I'll painting a mural also. Yeah. So I love it. Like Louis is building, well, I don't know how to build things yet, but Louis is helping me build these things together, and like it's really cool to be able to just push things into a 3D space and like have an experience. And I want to build like a whole thing that has like physical bottles that people can buy and look into and that kind of thing. Yeah.
So you want it to be interactive.
Yeah, or like immersive. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for telling your story. My question is, in some of my artwork, whenever I try to incorporate like Chinese culture, I always have this fear that I'm commodifying my culture, that I'm like highlighting all the superficial aspects of it, that I'm not like digging deeper. And I'm worried that it's coming off as very like I'm only highlighting the touristy aspects of my culture. And I'm just wondering like your thoughts on that.
This is a really, really good question, and one that I think my twin sister who is in Hong Kong brought up a similar thing with me, also because I think that looking at my work, you can tell that it comes from a Westerner's perspective. I am very American, and I'm aware of that. And I think that I still have similar fears, but I think it's important to, rather than like barring yourself from doing things, to like go for it and like make this work, because in the end it is still your culture, and it's important to make the work and trust that it comes from a place that belongs to you no matter what. And then perhaps later on you can look at it and be like, oh, this is actually like an artifact of a certain like headspace that I had with my culture, and maybe now I know more because I did that, and then I can move away from it, and now I can do more research and spend some time in it and like, you know, become more enriched and invested and talk about this other thing. Because like, not when you make a painting, it's not just making a painting, it's like you've like worked out that side of one thing, and you can like push it away now. At least that's how I see it. But I totally agree, and I think that I'm sure much of my work has that element of like perhaps touristy. I'm drawn to like aesthetics and all the cool stuff and like mythology and whatnot, but there's lots of messed up stuff happening in China that I don't have to interface with, and I know that. But I also don't know enough about it personally to talk about it yet, I don't think. So I think it is a very like quite an issue, and I think something important for, I think, us as like maybe like Westernized Asian Americans to like think about and talk about. And I'm glad you said that, because I need to think about that for my next show. Yeah, I'd like to go visit my sister and like get to know more about that. But I'm less worried about talking about mythology in China than I am talking about politics in China, because I know more about one thing and less about the other. And it is kind of dangerous. Yeah, I think once again, just like don't be afraid to paint about what you're drawn to. The worst thing you can do is like stop yourself from doing something, especially if it does belong to you. Like if you're painting about your culture, it belongs to you. But the way that you do it can always evolve. That was a really good question.
Hi, I'm Adi. Thank you again for coming. Yeah, I initially reached out when the RFP was out for the mural, because I think that I saw, I think, 2 of your pieces in San Francisco, like where I'm from, the Bay Area, and I was just so drawn to the detail and the psychedelic imagery and like the color. And I guess my question is sort of about process and sort of like having such detail-oriented pieces of art. Do you ever find it difficult to stop or step back or sort of like remove things? And is there sort of a process that you have to like step back and like sort of view it from like a different perspective than like when you're in this sort of like artistic moment of like creating something?
Thank you. That is a great process-oriented question. Also, thank you so much for your feedback. You've been super helpful with all the like mural sending and stuff. Happy to see you in person. I am obviously a maximalist, so like my vibe is always like a lot, really exciting, tons of stuff.
Or evacuate.
I know, honestly, that's one of my favorite terms.
Does anyone know that term? Or evacuate? It's the fear of emptiness.
Space.
Yeah. It's an art historic.
Yeah, it's a great term. Yeah, I've always been a maximalist with that, and to a point where it's like stressful, where it's like people are like, you need to be done. And I'm like, no, more.
Tiny little things.
Then I'm in the middle of
Like this one
painting,
here,
tiny
where
things.
there's so much stuff in every bowl. Do you see that?
Like I was just trying to make a painting of that drawing, and I was like, there, I'm like, Louis like, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm full of regret. But again, I think it's like when I make the drawings, which is like my first round of planning anything is just make the black and white drawing, because that's where the ideas come. You don't have to think about color or depth or anything. And I think for me, whenever I sit down to make a drawing, it's like no holds barred. You just draw whatever you feel like doing, and then like don't worry about anything else. And so that's why sometimes you just get honed in and end up drawing all the types of things. And then you add color, and then it'll turn into a mural. And I just, to be honest, I don't have that much restraint when it comes, like, I don't have a point where I'm like, I'm gonna edit this and take it out, really. And I think maybe that's, I've been thinking about moving into that as a sort of next stage of my work, because it's starting to get really stressful. Like people expect everything I do to have this insanely like packed, like dense imagery style. And I'm like, I literally can't do this anymore. I can't like whip it out that fast. And I do think there's a like the most, sometimes my favorite murals are the ones that are like the most simple, the most like minimal, or like you could tell the story from like one or two things. I think that's incredibly hard to do. So I think I will work on that in the future. And we've had help doing that. Yeah, that one's insane. Like I was like, why have I done this to myself? Why must I do this? And then I had to paint that like 4 times. Like,
Oh my
like there was like an actual physical painting. That's a mural, and then like. And then people were like, can you paint one for me? And I was like, no. But like it's monochrome, right? Like it's I was like, I can't do this in full color. I'm gonna try to do it in monochrome, which was a great idea, because then it was just like lighting only. So that I think is like, I was like hectic. I was like, oh my God, not every color ever. Like what will happen? But it actually ended up being better because of that. So I think that you're right, that I think like a sign of maturity with an artist is sometimes learning how to edit things, and maybe a manager can help me do that more in the future. But yeah, great question. Any other question? Kim?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how your art has evolved as your racial ethnic identity has changed, or your perception of the culture and your experience that has changed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that maybe through this slideshow you can tell that I think like the first, I'd say 5-6 years of my career were very much like sort of escapist focused, and I was really focused on just sort of like storytelling and creating a fun scene. And it was always about like painting Asian patterns that weren't like vapid or ornamental and like more aggressive, and that was my whole thing for a long time. But I think since the shooting in Atlanta and all the protests and the pandemic and everything, I've had like a lot of like lightning shot into me about what I'm really spending my time doing. Because before I think I was a little bit afraid to get political or be like loud about things or be controversial. And I also wasn't as educated. I didn't care that much about social justice because I didn't really have to. And I think being forced to stay home, I was protesting all the time. I was hanging out with people, and like my girlfriend's really, really politically active, and I learned a lot about what was happening in the world in my community when I usually was just like traveling around and like focusing on my career. And so my work shifted along with that. And I was like, if I'm going to spend time doing this and taking up space, then I think it needs to mean something. It doesn't always have to, but I think it really should, especially because there's so many people who don't get to take up space as often as I do. And I think that there's not that many people in the street art scene who are queer or BIPOC or like willing to talk about it. And I think it helps to feel seen and like help each other feel seen. So I was really nervous at first to like make political work, but I think that, you know, after like everything that happened with South Asian hate, like I realized it's really important, and it can create community and it can create connections. And then, you know, like I painted this Queer to Stay mural in West Hollywood, and like it was like the response was crazy. People were like, I've never seen anyone do a mural of someone who looks like me. Like I was like actively like, I want to paint non-binary people of color specifically. And they were like, sure, you can do whatever you want, which is amazing. But you know, because I was going through a really intense time of like, I came out as non-binary, and I was like in the process of searching for like more people to talk to about what that means. And I realized like it does the same, not the same thing, but it creates like a similar feeling to be like, if you're walking in West Hollywood, which is like a very white gay area, to see like a mural of like non-binary people of color and be like, this is physically taking up space for people like us. So I realize it's really important. And I gave money from what I made up to the people who posed for these for the murals, a way to like, once again, like make sure that it wasn't just about me. But yeah, and I don't, that's not to say that anyone who makes art or makes public art needs to be like political, but I think it's just like became very clear how important that was. And then like, if you're going through a process of like reconnecting with your heritage on sort of a public scale, it reminds other people that like maybe that's something important for them too, or like someone who's going through the same thing to be like, it's okay to like miss your grandparents and like wonder where they are, and like how to connect with them, or like there's ways to do that in practice, or like sitting in the studio, or like hanging out with your friends, or like learning Chinese or something. That we're not alone in trying to like hold on to our culture in a world that's become rapidly like whitewashed or like disparate. That it's something that is like we're all doing in different ways. Yeah.
My questions, Lauren? Or someone back there? Oh,
I'm also Lauren.
Oh, nice.
I have a question about I was hoping to talk about your use of color, just in like, I don't know, like what colors are you most drawn to, like when you start out painting in these really bright colors, or like how did you use this sort of
Yeah, it's funny because I honestly, I was terrible with color when I first started spray painting, like awful. I only knew how to make black and white drawings and then put watercolor like fades over things, but I didn't know how to do it. Like I didn't know how to paint at all. So when I picked up spray paint, people assumed I knew how to do it because I was making drawings, but I didn't. And I was just like pretending, and then they were like, "Oh, wait." I was like, "Yeah." So I actually learned how to use color through spray paint, which is really weird. But I like from just being only understanding black and white to like being a total like chromophile. I think again, it's the same advice of just like being like letting yourself be drawn towards what you want to be drawn towards. So I was always really into these sort of like super futuristic, like, you know, Tokyo pop, like underground, like dreamy colorscapes. And I like that because sometimes what I paint can be really like sort of dark and macabre, but if you throw these sort of hyper chroma colors over it, it makes it feel fun. And it makes it like, especially with social justice stuff, it's like, it gives it a way to talk about very dark things while making it try to feel like fun, like putting like a sugar coating over something that's like educational and heavy. And so, yeah, we're always like, oh, what are you gonna like? What are you painting? Like, what colors are you gonna do? I'm like, well, green, pink, blue, like, again, like, so there's color schemes that feel like home for you, but like I think over time you start like shifting away from things. Like I'm trying to move away from these pastels and move more towards like a more mature, like having grasp of the different mature color schemes, and that kind of thing. But you know, I think again, like every artist sort of like creates like a home for themselves, where it's like this feels good. These are the colors that feel like who I am, and then you start looking like your stuff and like wearing the same colors and whatnot. So yeah, it's just playing around with things until you figure it out, I guess.
Any other?
Final question? Anyone online? I think I did give them an opportunity to ask questions, but I did.
In the chat or something?
yeah, I did. Anyone on the Zoom wants to ask a question?
Yeah, there are people left in the box.
I know. Look at it.
All right. I mean, it looks like everyone's camera
We have
shot.
one more.
One more. All right.
You mentioned that because you travel around a lot in your art, like we possibly mentioned that code switching for each like location you go to. So I was wondering if you could like talk more about that. Like how do you adjust maybe like working in a different place or with a community you're not like used to or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a huge part of that is just always knowing that when you enter a different space, it's not yours. So like always going in with a sense of, I think, sort of deference to what's going on there. And I grew up like a lot of, I think, Asian friends, just being very like, I tend to be sort of like more quiet in the beginning and sort of like get a grasp of what's happening in the space before I figure out where I fit. But I think especially in like very foreign countries, it's important just to know that you're there as a guest, to do something that's really exciting, but also like within this world. And I think it's always really important to like try to spend some time there and meet the people, and also like take a tour around if you can and see some of the foliage, and maybe that'll show up in the work that you're making or whatever. Sometimes you don't get the chance because you're only there for a minute, but I think that's always really, really important. And I think once again, it's always a practice of trying to take your ego out of it, which is hard sometimes as an artist, especially when you have to be really empowered to make something big in a new space. But yeah, there's always like it's like you want to paint characters who like resonate with the people who live in this space and who like are going to see it every day. And like if you're working in predominantly like Black neighborhood, then you should think about painting people who like present in that way, or like all along these lines. Like if you feel comfortable doing that in a way that's not co-optive, or like you're painting in a space where it has Chinese history, is it okay to paint about Chinese history, that kind of thing. And then on a personal scale, it's sort of like the code switching thing is hard, especially like I don't know if anyone on the queer spectrum knows this, but it's like like there are ways to sort of communicate about like who you are and like hold yourself in a way that commands respect in different spaces. And it is hard sometimes to be in spaces that are like, I've had a lot of backlash from people, like they thought I was painting like gay things. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not, but that's hard sometimes. And like to be able to hold your own and like respect yourself and what you have to say in a space that maybe doesn't respect it, and like know that that's okay as well, because like you were brought out there to do that. And it's like it's a little bit hard to like navigate pronouns in many different countries with many different people. It's really kind of hard sometimes, but also like a really good conversation that happens. And then that's all part of it. Yeah, that's a really good question. I have to think about that more.
But I think you're getting at the layers of, again, doing an art practice that takes you in all these different places. And again, and obviously you have a personality that's comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I didn't used to be like that.
Okay.
I was always like this though.
So do you think, so going and you're putting yourself in all these situations has made you better at this?
Yeah, I think so. That's the other thing I wanted to say. It was like, I spent many years being like the only femme in a room with a ton of dudes. And I'm still like that most of the time. And I'm comfortable with that now, but in the beginning it was hard and scary. So I think that I was really quiet for a long time, and I still can be quiet, but like I think I've developed a personality that allows me to like feel empowered in the spaces that I navigate. Not all the time, but yeah, it's part of like creating public art is like sort of also like you become a channel for like the things that you do. And I've grown a lot as a person through that time. And I used to be really meek and like I'm still like sometimes, but yeah, that's a big part of it too.
And being forced to talk to people because you're out there on the corner, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely lots of crazy people, like lots of amazing people, but it's tough. Like you be painting anywhere and people just scream at you, or like, not everyone's gonna like what you're doing. And just to be, tough, and like it's raining, and there's no bathroom anywhere.
Just following on from that question, can you talk about how you combat censorship? Because it's like majority of the places where we go and we paint, there's always a certain element of censorship. So if you look at DC,
Oh yeah.
how you have to hide the message within the piece, and that's a constant like obstacle with censorship.
Yeah, great question. Especially with my work, because I don't know if it is in your opinion, but like my work is still considered kind of edgy within the street art sphere, which is because I haven't compromised on my style, or try not to. But it's like I don't get invited to certain things because I'm termed edgy, which is totally cool for me. But sometimes there's like there has to be a smart way to say the thing I need to say. So I knew, like, for example, I knew I was going to DC to paint a mural. This is when all of the abortion bans are happening in Texas. And I was like, I need to do something that's pro-choice. And then I asked the organizer, and they were like, my sponsors will yell at me if you do anything like that, but maybe there's like a subliminal way to do this. And so I was like, all right, cool. Let's write it using the tiger stripes. And so like the organizer showed it to his wife. His wife was like, cool, tigers. what are you talking about? And I was like, great, perfect.
Is there an image of that here?
Yeah, I think it's gone through. It's like it's an image of my friend Ladanya, who's a Colombian lesbian street artist. She's awesome. I was like, I want to paint Ladanya because I like depicting people who are, queer and BIPOC. But there's two tigers, and then in stripes it says, "My body, my choice." So I'm trying to find creative ways to like. I want to say these things, but I also don't want to get like too like preachy or too like virtue signaling. But sometimes you have to like say those things or find a way to say those things. And then I've had murals buffed because people didn't like what it was saying, and that's also part of the whole like losing your ego. People might love it and claim it for themselves, or they might just buff it.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Take it away, yeah.
I don't know where it is.
Well, let me see that. So it was two tigers?
One on top, one on bottom.
Okay. I can definitely see that.
It's somewhere. Yeah. Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's a good stop. Yeah. Any burning questions?
Yes.
I wasn't
Last
here
call.
for the next 3 weeks, so like I'd love to get to know you guys.
Yeah.
And also, what is the etiquette like if you're out there painting and people stop and talk to you?
If I'm up in the lift, it's gonna be hard to get a hold of me. Because I really like listening to music and painting. But my manager Louis will be here. And then also I come down every now and then. But I think there's gonna be a time when I don't know, like a time when I'm out there painting where we're supposed to talk with people or.
Oh, yeah.
That'll be open hours.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. I'm like, it's really chill too, because usually I'm trying to finish something in like 4 days, but I have 3 weeks, so it's like it's not as crazy. Yeah,
That's
should be really
great.
fun.
Well, awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.